Good morning. Welcome to this circle. This is the circle that we build every time we gather. And every time we do it, it looks a little different. There's maybe some new people beside us, some people we haven't met. Maybe there's some familiar faces that we can say hello to. But it's a wonderful circle to build with each other whenever we're here. We are a circle that is full of people as different as all of us, full of goodness and joy, but also full of heartbreak and challenge, all at the same time, because we're different people. This circle is full of those things that make each of us unique, but also full of what connects us together and what makes us alike. We're all welcome here. We're all invited here to make a place in this circle, not just for ourselves, but for each other. That's the goal of community, is to open ourselves to make of this time what we need it to be and what others need it to be. As we welcome each other to Southminster Steinhauer United Church, we also welcome those who join us by video and by our streaming and our YouTube channel, and we welcome everyone, whether they're at home in Edmonton or whether they are in Saskatchewan or Ontario or halfway across the world. We welcome them to this experience. This is a place where we work hard to make a safer place for all people. No matter who you are, you're welcome here. This is something that we work very hard to do, not just those who stand up here at the table, but all of us here in this circle, that we work hard to make a safer place, to explore the inner workings of our spirituality. This is a place where we're safe to find wisdom for our living and to strengthen our intentions to live more closely as we wish we could live. This is a place where we're safe to build community based on honest relationships and authentic spirituality. As we do that with each other and for each other, we welcome one another to this place and to this gathering. And let's welcome each other in song as we sing together.
We are grateful for this land on which we gather, land that is recently home to some of us, home to others of us a generation or two or three or four or five ago, and for many, a traditional ground, gathering place, and traveling route to the Cree peoples, Saulteaux, Blackfoot, Métis, Dene, and Nakota Sioux. We also acknowledge the Métis and Inuit, the many First Nations whose footsteps have marked these lands. And we seek to mend the wounds of our history with new relationship. Each time we gather, we place light in our midst. One of the ways that we remind ourselves that we are born into light, and yet we are ever seeking it. And we are seeking to reflect light and to honor light in one another. We light this candle to focus our intention to live the very best of our humanness, to keep turning toward better words, better ways, deeper courage, greater compassion. May we find with one another and with ourselves more reconciling ways in which to live.
We bring all parts of ourselves to this place, our whole selves. May we come to feel grounded in ourselves and in this place as we join in today's centering words. We celebrate the life that is within us. Breath and heartbeat, laughter and tears, experience, dreams, and memory. We celebrate the life that is between us. We honor life's sacredness. Expression. And let's join our voices together again as we strengthen our intentions for the ways we endeavor to live in the world. We pause in gratitude for the moments of discovery, in the honesty of deep connection, the release of tears, the easing of fears, the renewing of wonder, the delight of pieces making a whole. We pause to honor our moments of disorientation, when we are lost in our grief, in a search for something we can't quite name, in our worries, lost from ourselves and each other. As we open to the joy and pain of living, may we discover grace in the fragments we gather. May it be so.
Time for all ages means I welcome anyone of all ages to the carpet. If you want to come up here, come on up. We'll share some time together. Hi, everyone. I brought something with me that I want to show you. This is a very special treasure in our house. It belongs to my children's it belonged to my children's great-grandmother. And then it belonged to my children's grandmother. And now it belongs to my children's mother. Does that make sense? Well, it's been in the family for a long time. And it's just a silly little thing that sits on our counter. But yesterday, I knocked it off. Oh, I know. It's a little calendar, and it's this little friar guy. And so this is what's happened. But I'm not too worried because I want you to look very closely at this. I'm wondering if you can see how many cracks and times it's fallen off the counter.
One time.
More than one time.
One time it breaks into it's the 13th.
It broke on the 13th. That's why I stopped it there. I didn't change it. Now, as soon as this happened, I knew that today we were talking about certain things, about putting things back together. I didn't do it on purpose, honest. But I quickly wrapped it in this towel and put it in my bag to bring today before anyone else saw it. So now I get to go home today and look at all this. It's been glued together many times. I'm going to do it again. I'm going to glue it back. And it won't be perfect. We'll still see the lines, right? We'll see the lines in that. But it's going to be in one piece again. Maybe even by the end of today. And then it'll sit on our counter again and get pushed maybe not so close to the edge this time. And I don't know, we'll try to take care of it some more so that maybe my kids can have it on their counter. So I brought a story about this, and it's just a quick little story, but it talks about when things get broken. And it's called I'll Always Love You. You can look up at the pictures that are right up there, and I'll read it from here. One morning, Alex woke up early. I should have said, it's written by Peony Lewis, and the illustrations are by Penny Ives. One morning, Alex woke up early and ran downstairs to the kitchen. I'll make Mom some toast and honey for breakfast, he said. She'll like that. And Alex reached for the honey bowl and said, nope, he didn't say anything, but this is what happened. Crash! His mom's favorite bowl was now 9 pieces of sticky china. Alex hadn't meant to break it. What would she say? Well, let's see. Alex's mom was doing, there she is, her exercises. Hello, Alex, she said. Did I hear something break? This is a smart mom. She doesn't get mad right away. She just said, what was that I heard? Mom, will you only love me if I'm good? Asked Alex. Oh, I'll always love you, said his mom, and he smiled. Even when I've done something that isn't good, said Alex. I'll still love you, said his mom, honest. What if I have a pillow fight with Joey Bear and all the feathers burst out? Will you still love me? I'll always love you, though you must pick up all the feathers. Well, what if I spill my new pots of paint on Baby Pog and she turns green, red, and blue? Will you still love me? I'll always love you, Alex, though you will have to give her a bath. What if I forget to close the refrigerator door and the baby pulls everything out? Will you still love me? I'll always love you, though there won't be any food for lunch. What if I pour Grandma Bear's lumpy oatmeal all over my head? Will you still love me then? No. Yep, I will. I'll always love you, though you will have to eat another bowlful. Now, why are you being such a silly bear this morning? For a few moments, Alex didn't say anything. Then he whispered, "What if I break your favorite honey bowl? Will you still love me?" "You know I'll always love you," said his mom. "Come on, Alex, it must be time for breakfast." Then they went to the kitchen. "Oh no," cried his mom when she saw the pieces of sticky china. "Oh, that was my favorite bowl." "I'm sorry," said Alex. 2 tears drizzled down his face. "You said you would still love me. Do you still love me? I love you." "Of course I love you," said Mother Bear, hugging him. "Hey, I've got an idea," shouted Alex, and he wriggled away from her arms. "What is it?" she asked. "It's a surprise," said Alex, and he ran off to his bedroom. He looked in his toy box. He looked in his closet. He looked under his table. At last, he found what he wanted. He got out his new paints and poured some water into a jar and swirled his paintbrush around. And a little while later, Alex came downstairs again. "Here you are, Mom," he said, "but be careful. The paint is still wet." "Oh, I'll be very careful," said his mom, smiling, "because this is going to be my new favorite honey bowl." That's the story. I just wanted to share that because sometimes things break. And we can put them back together sometimes, not perfectly always, like this thing. And sometimes we can't even put them back together, and we have to think about maybe something we can use instead. And that's sad, but even when we're putting things back together or finding some new way to do it, the most important thing that this story reminds us of is love. Because love helps us to put broken things together. I know that seems weird when it just needs a little glue. But love helps us put all kinds of things back together. It helps us to put hurts back together. It helps us to put, when we say kind of some things that shouldn't come out of our mouth sometimes, it helps us to put that back together. Our love can help us in our lives put things back together. And that story reminds us of that love is important for picking up pieces in our lives and just carrying on, even if you need some glue along the way too. So right now, I want to thank you for coming up and sharing this.
I want to share a small piece of writing with you that is entitled "Recycling Our Lives, Recycling Our Religion," and it's a short article found on progressivechristianity.org, written by a man named Jim Burklow, and Jim is the Associate Dean of Religious Life at the University of Southern California. Last week, my wife and I visited family in Portland, Oregon. While we were wandering the streets on a cold afternoon, we stumbled into a store called Scraps. It's where artists go to get raw material for their creativity. Some might refer to the store as junk, but every item of junk is treasure in the eye of the right beholder. A little irregular box, pieces of leather, a bucket of random pencils, a bin of odd-shaped plastic lenses, a pile of replacement parts for pianos, a tub of dented ping pong balls with a sign over it that said, "To get rid of the dents, put them in boiling water." And over a barrel full of plastic tennis balls containing tubes, a sign said, "What will you do with these?" Well, there's two kinds of people. The kind of people who look at that sign and the contents of the barrel and they say, "Huh?" And the kind of people who look at it and say, "Challenge accepted." How many times have we told the story of our lives? And besides the story getting longer and longer, even in condensed form, how often have we changed that story, told a different version of it altogether? Think about it. There's countless ways of equally truthfully sharing your autobiography, no matter how young or old you may be. For one thing, there's a staggering amount of information to choose from in telling our story. We could spend all day just recounting the different kinds of foods we've eaten over our lives and in what context. My question for today is, pick out something from your life story and ask yourself, what can I do with this? How can I take this experience, this incident, this moment of my life and reuse it or repurpose it or recycle it and tell a new story of my life? Seems like a good question for a new year. How many obituaries have we read that have said, Jane Doe died after a valiant battle with cancer? I'd like to go on record right now and say that if I get cancer and die as a consequence, I do not want that sentence in my obituary. It's time to recycle the story of cancer. Of course it's time to compost cancer once and for all, but short of that, recycling the story of cancer is in order. Is it a journey? A battle? A series of discoveries, some miserable and others profoundly good? Is it like the War on Terror, or is it more like John Wesley Powell's exploration of the Colorado River, which included a lot of ups and downs and rapids and still waters and frightful incidents and amazing discoveries as his crew floated down the Grand Canyon? If this is how I go, please write my obituary in terms of the first trip down the Colorado. We just celebrated a major event in the history of recycling, Christmas. Because Christians took all kinds of bits and bobs and scraps from Judaism and recycled them into a new religion, starting with Christmas itself. If ever there was a mashup of disparate items into a new story, it would be Christmas. You reach into one barrel and you take the story of Augustus, the Roman emperor who was said to be born of a divinely impregnated woman. And then you reach into another bin and you take the hope of the Jewish people for a Messiah to deliver them from oppression. And you reach into another bucket and you pull out Bethlehem, where the king of the line of David should be born. And you reach into another pile where you find Nazareth, Jesus' hometown, and you create a story connecting all these locations. Keep going through the Hebrew Scriptures scrap store and string together the greatest story ever told. We practice a religion that was recycled from pieces of an older one. And we get to recycle Christianity's bits and bobs and scraps too into something that serves our souls for our time. We get to reuse parts of our religion that have been neglected or forgotten that are spiritually useful now, like the monastic practices of ancient and medieval Christianity that we left behind. And we get to repurpose parts of our religion that are really defunct in their original use, but with reinterpretation maybe can be put to use in new ways. And we get to recycle the good parts of our religion, which means reassembling the basic good elements in new and creative ways. And another word related to recycling is reduce, and wouldn't this be a good idea for our religion? Christianity's full of priceless treasures, and it's also got lots of excess baggage, mostly in the form of obscure and outdated dogma. Some things in our religion just need to be composted. Time to dig a hole and toss this stuff into it and bury it once and for all, and then plant the seeds of a new kind of Christianity on top of that heap. And whatever nutrients remain in the soil of that rotting dogmatic pile will feed some new and wonderful forms of faith. So how can we put these recycling practices into action in our lives? How can we reuse and repurpose and recycle and reduce and even compost the incidents and the memories and the experiences and the trajectories of our lives into a new narrative that serves us better? because the stories that we choose to tell are the stories that shape our lives today. And if we tell the story of our past as though it was a battle, we'll be looking for cover or looking for weapons. And if we tell our story as though it were like going down the Grand Canyon for the first time, we'll be looking for adventure and discovery and taking deep breaths and exhaling in awe of beauty. So, in 2018, do we tell the same old story? Or come up with a new one out of the same factual raw material that aims towards kindness and joy and creativity? And will we do Christianity in the same old way, or will we recycle the good old elements into a fresh new faith for our time? We could say, huh? Or we could say, challenge accepted, in the thoughts of this contemporary writer.
This story, told in this particular way, is only found in John's Gospel, which was the last of the 4 Gospels to be written. The story starts on the lake shore, and it goes like this. After this, Jesus went to the other side of the Sea of Galilee, also called the Sea of Tiberias. A large crowd kept following him because they saw the signs that he was doing for the sick. Jesus went up the mountain and sat down there with his disciples. Now the Passover, the festival of the Jews, was near. When he looked up and saw a large crowd coming toward him, Jesus said to Philip, "Where are we going to buy bread for these people to eat?" He said this to test him, for he himself knew what he was going to do. Philip answered him, 6 months' wages would not buy enough bread for each of them to get a little. One of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, said to him, "There is a boy here who has 5 barley loaves and 2 fish, but what are they among so many people?" Jesus said, "Make the people sit down." Now, there was a great deal of grass in the place, so they all sat down, about 5,000 in all. Then Jesus took the loaves, and when he had given thanks, he distributed them to those who were seated. So also the fish, as much as they wanted. When they were satisfied, he told his disciples, "Gather up the fragments left over, so nothing may be lost." So they gathered them up, and from the fragments of the 5 barley loaves left by those who had eaten, they filled 12 baskets. In this story from the Jesus tradition passed down to us in writings from late in the 1st century, may we find wisdom for our living.
We know what it feels like, that experience Chris shared a few moments ago. When something that we value, something we treasure, something that's been a part of our lives or our families for a long time, or something we grew attached to, when it gets broken, what do we do with all those pieces we sweep up? Or something we always believed in, something we thought was a self-evident truth, something we trusted falls apart. It frays, the seams come undone. And what do we do with all those pieces that no longer hold together? Life breaks our plans, breaks our ideas, our theories, our belief systems. Life breaks our hearts in any number of ways. Sometimes it's betrayal, sometimes it's disappointment, sometimes it's failure, sometimes it's hurt. So many losses of so many different kinds, but always the question becomes, what do we do with the pieces into which life has broken us? That's one of the questions that old story of a boy with bread and fish invites us to ask. In the world of that story, there were a whole lot of people on that hill with high hopes, with broken hearts, with great expectations, looking for something that would mend the brokenness of their world as they experienced it. Like us, their world was out of control, out of their control. And they were the targets of the usual empire-building tactics of moving power and wealth into the hands of the few who would do anything to keep the favor of the emperor. They were the ones who were being swindled off their own land by a taxation scheme to force them from subsistence farming into becoming day laborers. They were losing their lake to the monopoly fishery that was being run out of Tiberias and controlled by Rome. Their lives were at the mercies of policies devised miles and miles away and implemented by foreign soldiers, and especially by collaborators who used to be their leaders, who were their friends and their neighbors. They were tired and hungry. They were tired of tyranny and hungry for hope. They were tired of being exploited and hungry for leadership. They were tired of poverty and hungry for some security. And the writer gives us this huge clue in the story by literally putting them, taking them to the other side of their world. The ones that John's gospel puts on that hill to hear what it is Jesus of Nazareth has to say to Jewish peasants are those who've gone over to the other side. Not only have they gone over to sought help from the fringe, from a guy who was on the margins of society, a guy with some pretty radical things to say about economics and the social order of his society. But the story goes to the trouble of putting them on the other side of the lake, the Galilee, the fishery that earned them their livelihood until the latest policies of the Roman emperor. And they're over on the Gentile side of the lake. The ones with whom they'd had nothing to do with for most of their life. For the contemporaries who were hearing this story for the very first time, it was as though that crowd had gone looking for love in all the wrong places. And as the story goes, they've been eating up what they've been taught until, at the end of the day, their bodies are as tired and hungry as their spirits. Those who are closest to Jesus, his inner circle of followers, see this hunger as a big problem, and they urge Jesus to send the crowd away so they can each find something to eat and a place to sleep. As though they've been groomed in a theory of economics that sees the solution to every crisis to go forth and make consumers of every man, woman, and child. Send them away to spend. Send them to shop until they drop. Let them spend their way out of being tired and hungry. The story says, send them away so they can each find their food. Send them away to look after themselves. Let each of them fend for themselves. It's survival of the fittest, isn't it? Isn't that the rule of life? But without even having a table to turn. The story has Jesus perceive the situation differently and invite his friends to see the need to eat not as a problem to be solved in isolation or by competition, but an opportunity to face something together creatively and collectively. So the first thing the story has them do is take an inventory. They begin to shift their attention away from what they don't have to discover what they do have. And they were invited in that act to find out who they were together. What are the resources they had? Are there some who don't have anything and some who have more than they need? Some who have just enough. And who knows how many they asked? The story just has them find a kid in the crowd who has a lunch. Maybe he was the first one they asked. Who knows? But they come back to report they found a child with bread and fish. Someone had something. Maybe others did too. And then the story needs to reconfigure the crowd. It has them sit down. It tells us on lots of green grass. Maybe that's a very small detail. But somehow in that sitting down on the good earth, somehow maybe we cease to be an anonymous crowd, a huddled mass, and we start to become a community. We stop being the homeless problem or the refugee situation or the wage gap or the victims of disaster, and we start to see each other as the same species facing different circumstances. Some of us have something in our knapsack, and some of us have nothing, and some of us have way more than we need for today. And the crowd begins to become communities, in touch with the common ground of their humanity, and earth becomes their table. And the story doesn't end with some miracle of multiplication. The story leaves us to pick up the pieces. There are all these leftovers, baskets of leftovers. Enough to tell a good story. Like Phoebe Gilman's story of Joseph and his grandfather. A boy whose grandfather was a tailor, who sewed a blanket for him when he was born. And as time went on, that blanket became frayed and worn. And his mother saw just enough material in the blanket that she could snip, snip, snip and turn it into a coat. And in time, the coat becomes too small. And the mother sees there's just enough material to turn it and snip, snip, snip and turn it into a vest. And in time, Joseph outgrows the vest. And she sees there's enough material to snip, snip, snip and turn that cloth into a tie. Well, the tie found its way into the soup too many times. And at the end of its life as a tie, she saw yet another way to snip, snip, snip and turn that tie into a handkerchief. And then ultimately, when there was nothing more to make of the pieces, except a good story of how somehow, again and again, we make something out of what has been. We make something from the scraps, from the fragments, from the pieces. Years ago when Chris and I were part of Rio Terrace Community Church, I remember that Ruth and Jim Stevenson had a dog called Scraps. I think it was a way of saying that Scraps didn't come from some fancy purebred lineage, but he had kind of a genetic genius of garden variety mutt in him. A lineage of a little of this and a little of that, and mostly a whole lot of nothing anybody could identify. And I love that name because it's so descriptive. In this era of DNA testing being so in vogue, doesn't that kind of name us all? That we're all scraps of the evolutionary trials and errors, the accumulated experiences of planetary life, of human history, of life experience. That we hold little pieces of wisdom and courage and grace and beauty, and we hold them loosely, knowing there's no neat and tidy fit. There are not cookie-cutter pieces like a puzzle that only fit together in one way. That there are so many ways to configure our lives and so many ways to join one piece of life to another, that it will always be in the nature of life that some of the pieces will come apart. We're passing on a faith tradition of scraps too. Not some purebred line that started 2,000 years ago that can be traced back to a carpenter's son who became a problem for the Roman Empire. But scraps and fragments and pieces of Judaism and paganism and animism and the wisdom teachings of so many prophets. We are part of jackets coming out of blankets and vests coming out of jackets and stories, picking up pieces and inviting us to collectively and creatively place them loosely in relationship with one another, arranging and rearranging the pieces we hold. Always a conversation of fragments. Because isn't life a work in progress? It's not a puzzle to solve or a race to win. From generation to generation, we're picking up pieces and passing something on. We're passing on a different world than the one we inherited. The science, the technology, the literature, the history, the religion, the spirituality is different than what we inherited. We are entrusted with wisdom and intelligence to take the pieces that are still helpful and discard the ones that are no longer useful and repurpose others and recycle others and compost still others. Because just like the friends of Jesus, we're faced with baskets full of fragments, an abundance of experience. And what we're left with as experience and memory and imprint and inheritance, that gift of fragments has the power to make us whole, even as we hold the pieces. want to invite us into a few more moments of silence with one another, an opportunity for us to name in the quiet of our own heart those pieces of life we celebrate with deep gratitude, and those pieces of life we hold in this moment with fear, with anguish, with sorrow. And in this time, we'll pause in the quiet of our own hearts to name those things, and in a moment we'll offer the affirmation that we find on the screen. So we continue in a spirit of prayer with one another. In so many ways, each of us hold the curvaceous, glorious, wondrous pieces of life with deep gratitude. And we hold the sharp edges from which we feel the deep pain of loss, of grief, of fear, of anger. All the pieces that make the whole of our experience in the midst of beauty and brokenness. This is a time for us to take a few moments with one another to share invitations, announcements to...
As we continue now, we speak of the ways that we center ourselves and focus our lives. We want to contribute to what is important. We want to live our lives with values that make a difference and make meaning for us and for those around us. So let's encapsulate that, and let's sing about it, and let's focus our attention and our purpose in our living.
We go into this day with all the pieces we hold, all the fragments we carry, all the patches that we seek a place to sew into our lives. We go trusting the whole of life, knowing that our love is deep, that our capacity in community is great. We go to share the light that is within us, between us, beyond us, among us. And we go asking the great question, how then shall we live? Took a step of pride in my walking, stepped inside another's shoe.
Hey, it's Christopher. Thanks for watching this video. If you want to watch last week's video, click this button right here. If you can manage it and can donate to SSUC to help us continue this video page, click right here. And for any information that you want about SSUC and our programs, visit our website right there.